Welcome back to Personalist Manifestos. My name is Michael Morelli and I'm the host of this ongoing conversation about contemplative revolution. In this episode, we're finishing the 4-part seminar series on disability in the church I've been sharing with you over the course of the last few weeks. So be sure to check out the other 3 sessions before you jump into this one if you haven't already. Or you could start here and work your way backwards if you want. It's up to you, really. Either way, in this session, we're hearing from my friend Kathy Dubbledam, the director of Young Life Capernaum in Canada. Now, you may have heard of Young Life. Who hasn't? But have you heard of Young Life Capernaum? It's all about relationships. Relationships that start with meeting teens with disabilities where they're at, caring for them, and sharing the Christian faith in simple and understandable terms, all with no strings attached. So really, they want to make sure that every teen involved in Young Life Capernaum knows they're invited, celebrated, and needed. And since Kathy is the director of this Young Life ministry, she's got so much wisdom to share about what it looks like to create communities where everyone truly belongs and truly shares the gifts they have received from God. And so with that, here is Kathy's presentation.
My name is Kathy Dubbledam, and I work for an organization called Young Life. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's a faith-based youth mentorship program is how we say it. But it's kind of loving kids in their world and then introducing them to Jesus Christ. And so we work with junior high and high school kids. And about 11 years ago, I felt the call in my heart to there's a branch of Young Life called Young Life Capernaum that's out of the US, to bring that up to Canada, which is how are we making sure that the gospel is getting to our friends with disabilities? And then as our friends respond, how are we making sure that they're using the gifts that God has given them to serve in their communities, in Young Life, in their churches and things. And so that's been my journey over the last 11 years. And my only training is I have a brother with special needs. My parents fostered kids growing up, and one of my brothers stayed with us. He has fetal alcohol, and it's been a huge part of my life. Lived with me for a number of years and has just moved out with my other brother in Ottawa now. But my kids all know him. He's been raised by him as well. So he's been a big part of our family and has been my just life training. So I have no technical training, but just life training. So we've heard 3 great sessions already. It's been lots of the theology and the heart and the reasoning behind what we do. And my job today is for us just to think through the practical, like the so what. Okay, so we have all this information, sounds great. So what do I do to kind of turn the dial in my own life, in my own heart, and then also, in my community, in my church, wherever you're at work. And so I would encourage you to either grab a pen and paper or have something you're writing, because I'm just going to talk through a bunch of things. I'm just going to share stories, tell things, and things might spark thoughts for you. You might think that's a really great idea, or that's something that I wonder if we should look further into. But I'm going to do the practical piece through story. And a little caution before I dive in is sometimes, and I say this because this has been something I've had to battle in my own life, as I tell stories, sometimes in my talking about it, but also in our own tendency in hearing it, some of these stories are really hard to hear. Like, they're really terrible stories, some of them. They're really hurtful, or they're really things that kind of opened up my eyes to the work we need to do in our own lives in the church. And we can accidentally have a perspective of, thank God that's not our church, or thank goodness that's not us doing that. And I'm so glad I'm not like that. And my challenge for you is to sit in the discomfort, sit in the uncomfortable piece of, we are the church. And so even though we didn't do it, our brothers and sisters have been a part of this. But also to say, Lord, I might not think that way specifically, but show me in this story where you might be kind of stretching my heart a little bit, or opening my eyes, or pushing me into spaces where you're asking me to go that feel uncomfortable. So I just want to give that little disclaimer before I start. But my hope is that it might spark ideas, thoughts, next steps, all these kind of things as I kind of tell the stories. I'm just going to remind us about these 5 stages. It's called the 5 stages of changing attitudes, or this is how Greg had it last time, of the mutualistic ministry among persons of all disabilities. But just before I get into some of the practical, I just wanted to kind of bring us back to these stages, and I hope that it is an encouragement to you that we all come in at stages. The goal isn't for you to enter this conversation at co-laborers. The vision isn't that you would just come in and you're ready to go. When I started Capernaum 11 years ago, I was definitely at the care place. I definitely had that attitude. I was kind of thinking, oh, like, look at these great kids and what can we do to help these kids? How can we care for them? And it's been 11 years of moving along to friendship and then to co-laborers for me to get there. So I want to encourage you that this is the trajectory that you're on, but also with your church or your community group or your neighborhood, whatever it is, it can feel frustrating if you come in and they're at pity, but just to give you the reminder that that there'll be different things that we do along the way. There's awareness, there's access, inclusion, belonging. These pieces will start to turn, and it is a step that you go along. So I hope that encourages you and to remind you that this is the perception we're coming into, and we're starting at these different places, and that is okay. But 2 years from now, if we meet again and you're still at the same place, that's where it's not okay. We want to make sure we're moving along the vision there of going through the stages, if that makes sense, as well. So just wanted to start off with that. What brought me here to this place? Someone asked me, like, why are you in this space of working with churches? Because I do work with youth. I do work in the schools. I do work with Young Life. And I have three kind of things that happened in my story that brought me here. One was I started Young Life Capernaum in Edmonton. And as our kids became Christians, we sent them to some of the churches in Edmonton with their families. And all of them came back and said the church asked them to not come. They didn't know what to do with them. They were too loud. They were making noise, didn't fit in. And they just said, maybe there's a better fit for you somewhere else. So they came back to me and said, we don't know where to go. So I was like, well, that's interesting. That's an odd. Okay. So that kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And then I had a youth pastor from another church call me and say that they had a young man with Down syndrome in their youth group, that they weren't quite sure how to help him fit in, but they knew that I was a group for people with disabilities. Could he join us? And I was like, no, like our goal is to meet kids, introduce them to Jesus, and then get them plugged into the church. And he was saying, could you take him out of our church because we don't know what to do with him? So I thought, do you need training? Do you need support? Like, it just started to open my eyes about some of these struggles. And then the third one, which is to me one of the hardest ones that I had to face, was I was in Winnipeg for meetings and got connected to this group of families. There's probably 4 or 5 different families there, and all of them are families with people with disabilities in their family. And they all had tried to be connected into a church, were in a church and were asked to leave the church, and had formed a support group to say, we need to support each other. How do we care for one another? Because we can't get into church. So they're like, maybe we need to be our own church. And they were just wounded by the church that had asked them to leave just because of whatever their needs were that were complicated to the church. So it just really opened my eyes to this idea of, I think our churches might need support, might need help, might need care from the other side. So I kind of stopped. I hired people to do kind of the work I was doing in the schools, and kind of came the other way saying, what could I do to help these churches, help sit with them, help connect with them, help train them, develop them, so that as our families and others as well start entering into the church, they would know what to do, or at least who to call, or how to open up support. So that kind of started me on this trajectory. But then, as I've kind of grown in this, I've created a bit of a vision for what I would hope the church would be. So the first thing is one of my visions for the church is that the church would be ready and equipped. And so that as my friends and as all our friends start entering the church, that they would be ready and equipped. And my story here is we had a gentleman, or a young boy named Ken, who had graduated high school. He was in the foster system and had foster, so no parents, ended up in a home. And what happens when you graduate in the foster system to an adult is you just kind of have a social worker who checks in on you, but you have kind of your own place. And he just lived by himself. And he had become a Christian, and we were trying to get him connected into the church and could not find a church that we could get him connected to. It was all cold calling. but I kept thinking, man, if there was a men's group that was ready to embrace him, that they could take turns picking him up at their house, bringing him in. He doesn't have a dad. He doesn't know what it's like to be a man, let alone a Christian man. And could there be a group that could take him under their wing? And I cold called churches, but they didn't understand what I meant, and they didn't. No, it's not really what we do. And no, I don't still know that that'll work with us. And have you tried this church? And whatever. And we just could not find a place. Cold calling. Now we tried to go in through some connections too, and he just ended up going with a Young Life leader into their church, which was out of the way and not in the right location. But I just thought, man, if the church could be ready and equipped so that when those things happen, we could call and they'd be like, yeah, we know exactly what to do, or we know who to connect you to, or we have this person in our church who's working on that will make sure that they get connected. That would have been something that would have been just a great help to us in that way. The second thing is that the church would, so the church would be expected. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong screen here. That they would be expecting people with disabilities to show up. I got connected to a gentleman who was a pastor at a church, and he had to fight tooth and nail to get an elevator at his church. And they were doing a big renovation and saying, I think we need an elevator. A lot of our programs happen in the basement. We need an elevator. But it was going to add $150,000 to the price tag. And they're already raising a bunch of money. So that was going to be too much to add. And he fought and fought and fought for it. And some guy finally said to him, we don't need an elevator. We don't have people that need an elevator at our church. And he just looked at them and said, I can tell you why we don't have people who need an elevator at our church, because we don't have an elevator. And just this idea of like, let's not wait until someone in a wheelchair shows up and then scramble to finish or to fix it, I mean. And it just gave me this beautiful picture of, can you imagine the church being the type of place that when people with disabilities arrive, it's we were waiting for you. We knew you would come. We were expecting you. Look what we have ready for you. We were hoping you would come, rather than, we can carry you down the stairs until we adjust. Like that feeling is just what they encounter in the world all the time. And so could we as a church be a place where we just have this light in our eyes, like we couldn't wait for you to come. Look what we have ready. So that was a big piece to me that I thought, man, it'd be so great. We had another story of a Young Life story. So we had a guy who was doing a Young Life club at a church or in a church building, and had invited a guy. He met him at his school every day, saw him at lunch hour. He was in a wheelchair, and invited him out to the club. They did this club once a week, and the kid said no every time. And he kept saying, oh, we'd love for you to come. He's like trying to get it all ready. Like we'd love for you to be a part of this. And the leader was telling me, he was so humbled. He said, finally, I said to the boy, we would love for you to come, and you say no every time. Why do you say no? And the boy looked at him and he said, because I don't fit through the door of the building you're meeting at. And the leader didn't even realize what he was asking him to do. The room wasn't accessible. It wasn't wheelchair friendly. And he was trying to push him into this space, and just had this realization of, you're right. I didn't even think of that. I was trying to get you into my space, not thinking, is this even a welcoming space for you? So one of my hearts is, how do we help the church be expectant? Saying we assume people with disabilities are going to come. We hope they come. We can't wait for them to come. So when they come, they find their space to fit and they belong. And then the last one is that people would be, that the church would empower to serve. And so this would be one of my biggest learning curves that I had a couple of years ago, but just realizing that our friends with disabilities, especially intellectual disabilities, a lot of times we just make assumptions about what they know and what God can speak to them through them, and realizing, no. As each one of our friends responds to Christ, he gives them gifts and abilities to serve in his kingdom and to create spaces where people understand who God is more because of what he has given them. And so figuring out what that means. And I got connected to a woman who worked at this it was called Alberta Inclusion. So I think there's a BC Inclusion, but Alberta Inclusion, not Christian. She wasn't a Christian, but I listened to her tell these stories, and anyways, I would long for the church to be like this. But so two stories. One is she would work with young adults so that when they were not fitting into their connections and their communities and their workforces and things, it would come to her to say, can you help adjust? And so she got connected to this guy who was very non-responsive. He would be at a space, but he wouldn't really make eye contact. He was verbal, but just barely used his voice. He barely blinked. Like, he was not very, engaging. And so a lot of groups would kind of ask him to leave or say he's not a good fit. Like, he's not fitting in with what we do. But this woman thought, no, you've been given a gift. I got to think about it. And so she thought for a minute, did some research, and got him a job as a still life model for an art studio. And so he doesn't blink, he doesn't move, he doesn't talk, he's not interested. And so this studio hired him to be a still life model so artists could practice drawing or draw human figures. And he became so sought after that he started to lose his government funding, and they had to adjust and figure out what do we do here? Because he was a phenomenal still life model because he didn't move. And so she was so delighted to tell me this story, because she was like, everyone thought he wasn't a good fit for things, but I knew he has a gift, and I got to figure out what it is. And then the other story was the other way. So there was a guy who was outgoing, talkative, in the way, completely ignored social boundaries, just push, had such just would make people feel uncomfortable, and they just couldn't control him, is what the issue was. So it came to her to say, what could you find a role for this kid? And so she thought about it. And the other way, she got him signed up as a mascot for the volleyball team, the local volleyball team. And he flourished, because what do you do as a mascot? You break social bounds, you step into spaces, you create energy, you're loud and busy, and took what his gift was and then created it into this space where he could actually flourish in what he was. And I just thought, man, if I long for the church. I mean, not just disability, right? For all of us, but to be thinking, what gifts has God given you? And how do we put you in spaces where that gift can flourish and thrive? And then the church example I have of that is, I have a friend named Chantel, and she has cerebral palsy. She's in a wheelchair, and her hands, her body is quite, her hands don't work very well. And, but she goes to church, and she wanted to serve at her church and thought it was time for her to kind of use some of her gifts. And so she was trying to think, what do I do to serve? And she thought, I'm just going to be easy on the church. I'll just be a greeter, be simple. I can just plunk my wheelchair there. It'll be no problem. And so she went to the church and said, I'd like to serve, but this is where I think I should serve. And this church was so brilliant. And it was just such a beautiful picture. But the church, the board, or whoever it was, said to her, you are welcome to serve as a greeter. If that's what you think God is calling to you, we will empower that. But we actually would like to call you to something different. We think you would be a phenomenal person to serve communion, which blew her mind. First off, communion is up a series of steps. So if you want it, when you go to receive communion, you got to walk up all these steps. So she physically can't get there. In fact, she often doesn't have communion unless someone remembers to bring it to her. And so she was thinking, well, I can't go up the steps. And then also her hands don't work as well as they could. And so she can't hand people the wine and the bread. And so she was like, I appreciate you saying that, but I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I physically can do that. And again, they were very cautious to say, if you don't want to, you don't feel like God's calling you, we respect that. But also, we see something in you that you might not see in yourself, and we think this would be a gift to our church. So she said she was willing to try. She said, if you think I can do it, if you're okay with the complication I would love to do that. And so they moved her communion station down, which cared for so many people who didn't want to also go up the stairs, or that caused complications. So now to have a lower communion station was a gift to a lot of people. And they rigged up someone engineered a tray on her wheelchair for her, so she could actually motion the elements towards them without actually having to pick them up. But they had to work on it. And she just said it has been such a gift to her that they saw that in there, they called it out in her, and they had to adjust, they had to change, they had to recognize their shortcomings, but then we're able to kind of step into that and push into it together to say, we see this in you. And if you're willing to consider, if you feel like God is also calling this out in you, we would love to present you this opportunity. So it was just such a beautiful picture of what does it mean to see someone's gifts and then empower them to serve, even though it might not fit in the way that we set it up. Well, we have communion, we go upstairs and someone hands you the pieces and that's how we do communion. They had to adjust. So it was this really kind of just important shift in the church and the church's mindset, the way they did that. I want, now that I've kind of sparked some of those thoughts, talked about what I see the church, some of my vision, I want you to kind of wrestle with some of this, thinking about your own church, your own life, kind of the spaces you are. So the couple of questions I had for you to just kind of think about, to talk about, is what do you think this would look like for your church? When you think about your church, what are some of the things that it could look like in your church? What would it cost your church financially and also people-wise and time-wise and things, but what kind of cost do you see that some of these kind of ideas might shift? So what could it look like as a church? What is your vision? What could your vision be for the church? And then what would it cost to be ready, equipped, expectant, and then to help our friends discover their gifts to serve? A great story I have is we get invited into schools a lot to help out in the classrooms. And so I, as a Capernaum leader, got to go into the basis classroom or whatever it was. And a whole group of like PTs, ETs, whatever, they all came in to help and assess the kids. And I was chatting with one of them and she said, like, what are you doing here? Like, she was quite confused by me. And I said, oh, I'm just here to hang out. Like, we're just relational. And she's like, what's your training? I was like, oh, I have no training. I just hang out. We just play games. Our heart is to like build relationship. And she kind of sat there quietly. I was like, I'm about to get in trouble. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And she just looked at me. She said, I'm so jealous of you. I was like, of me? Why? And she goes, when I look at Brad, I see speech delay, motor skill issue. She's like, I diagnose all the time. You look at Brad and see Brad. And she's like, I miss that. I long to see Brad. And so just even know that that's the gift. There is lots, and I'll talk about it in a second, but we do need experts around us, but know that the heart is, you're just seeing Brad, you're just seeing the person. And then you're not thinking, oh, what about these diagnoses and stuff? So I was really affirmed thinking, okay, maybe this is good. Our heart is, how do we build relationship and introduce them to the greatest relationship we think. It's not just disability, there's lots, but what this does is it forces us against efficiency and productivity, right? And I find my work holds a mirror up to the church and says, are we really about this, or are you about numbers and about, whatever? And it causes a discomfort. You've got to really wrestle with that. There isn't a checklist and, all sorts of things, but I'm about to give you some things you can do. So just something that came out of our time talking and even through the other sessions that we've had, I hope that you have come to kind of settle in. It's not a what, it's a who, right? Like, this is a who. And so if you want a what, if you want a program, if you want, you can create a box that this all works in and checklist, and you just run the program. But when you realize it's a who, and when you focus on the who, it's nuanced, it's different. And like I was just kind of saying in the breakout there with my group, but just saying, like, I told you a story of a woman with cerebral palsy who it was a gift to her to serve communion, but we're not going to write down cerebral palsy, serve communion, right? Like, that's not the solution. That's what worked for her. And that's what that church recognized as her gifts. And they had to adjust and work around it to make it work for her. And they had to recognize their own limitations that they had created in the church accidentally, thinking they were being efficient and things. But that's not the solution going forward. And I think I had met with a camp a couple summers ago who wanted to bring in people with disabilities on their summer staff, and we're trying to be open and inclusive. But they were like, and they'll do retail because that's where it fits. And I was like, you don't even know who's applied. You don't know any of the people. But to them, it was contained, controlled. You would go to a spot, you would stay there. If you had physical issues, you could just sit, and it was simple, and it checked the box for them. So now we can say we're inclusive. And they had a gentleman who applied who has gifts in video editing and videoing, but he's also in a wheelchair and also nonverbal. And so they were trying to say, well, he would fit better in the retail, but it was like, but he's been given gifts. And so I had to sit in that tension with them as they were trying to check a box and not actually recognizing the who, right? They were trying to push for a what. And it was just a really interesting challenge for them to have to face. And so, I mean, one of the things that I just always start off with is what should I do? So if I want to turn the dial even a little bit in my own heart, in my community, in my family, in my church, and I say it that way, recognizing we were even talking as well as some of you on this call are decision makers in your church, and some of you are lay people, and you might think, I don't know what I can do, and I want to recognize that in that. So I'll speak to kind of both scenarios here. But regardless of what it is, bring in the experts. And so experts are people with disabilities. The nothing about us without us, right? Is this idea and making sure that they have a voice, but also recognizing a lot of the families I work with are tired of their voices and just saying, could someone not just see it? Do I have to constantly advocate? So not assuming just because they have a disability, they want to be vocal in this story, but inviting them into it. So people with disabilities, families with living with people with disabilities are great experts. But then you have people who've studied this, occupational therapists, EAs, physical therapists. Even groups like us, like the Lazarus Center, or I know there's lots of incredible groups doing things like Bethesda. When I lived in Alberta, Rehoboth was one. Like there's just lots of groups, Chrysalis, all these different kinds of groups that really do work hard and are trained and skilled in these scenarios. And so when I was running a club with Capernaum, I didn't know, I knew how to gather people. I could do relationship. I could figure out how to share the gospel, all these things. But I had a friend of mine who was an occupational therapist who was one of my leaders to say, would you just come be at the club with me, watch, help, advise me, show me what it is I need to be doing in order to do this well. And I assembled a team of people, a mom of a son with a disability, so that she could speak into it to say that event you're doing, it doesn't work for me. That would be really hard on us. I'm like, okay, help me do this. But bring in the experts who can help advise you, speak into the spaces. And I promise you they're at your church. And I have learned one of the ways you do it is just start saying the word disability, or that we're starting to lean into, we want to help make this a better space for people with autism and things like that. And it'll spark, people be like, oh, like I grew up with a brother with a disability, and anytime people did that sort of thing, and I would hear about it, I would sign up for it. I just need to know what was happening. So it'll spark for certain people who have a heart for it and who are drawn to it. So bring in the experts. The second one, just start. I find a lot of times we talk about it, we meet about it, we read about it, we wonder about it, watch a video about it. And sometimes my encouragement to you is just start doing something. And this class might be your start. This might be like, okay, I started. I just need to start. Just putting legs under a little bit, leaning into it, and just simply doing something that kind of moves you into that direction. And then the third thing, keep going. Now, I know this probably isn't the list you were hoping for. You're probably wanting specific things, but this over the time is what I've learned. Keep going, keep doing the thing you're doing. I can't tell you how many kids that I've encountered where their programs have just asked them to leave because it's been too hard, too long. We can't keep going with you. I had this one girl, her name was Brianne, and her and I were hanging out a bunch. I was connecting with her. Her mom was excited. Her mom was a single mom, and she had 3 kids, 2 of them having quite significant autism. And so I was connected with them, hanging out. And then all of a sudden one day, they just dropped me. I could not get a hold of them. I texted, I called, I tried to find them. I could not get a hold of them. And we had a camp coming up, and I was trying to get her to come. And the camp was only $49. And I was trying to say, like, we could even cover that. Like, can you come? Nothing, getting nothing from her. So finally, I drove over to her house and I knocked on the door, and the mom answered. And I was like, hi. I was like, I'm trying to find Brianna. Like, I'm curious if she's still here. I'd love to hang out with her. And her mom literally had this posture of like, oh, she's like, she goes, I just assumed you were done with us. My daughter usually only lasts about 6 months in a program, and then they're done with us. So I was just making it easy for you. We just disengage at 6 months because it's just easier for us to pull out than for the disappointment for her to keep trying to go and being asked to be done. was like, I'm not done with your daughter. And you know, like they can't afford anything. She's a single mom, and she can't drive her anywhere because she's often working 2 or 3 jobs. And so it just costs a lot to take care of her daughter and connect with her daughter. So it just really taught me the value of just keep going. And now having your hands open, adjusting as needed. And that's my fourth point here. You won't get it perfectly right the first time. You're not going to get it right. And this is where we have to be cautious, because I'm not saying do damage, forge forward. Doesn't matter if it, you know, like this is your vision for it. Not that by any means. Like we this Capernaum work that I've done has been the most humbling, digging out my own idols, my own fears, my own struggles, my need for efficiency, my need for productivity. It has forced a lot of things to come out of me, but also having to hold my hands open, knowing I just need to try. And I know I'm not going to get it right, but I'm bringing in the experts. I'm listening to voices. I'm going to keep going, but have a humbleness about me to be like, man, I have got lots to learn. And our first fundraiser, I look back and I am embarrassed of my speech. It was so full of pity. It was so full of these poor kids, but look what we're doing, and this poor ministry and their poor stories, but we are so great. And I look back and I'm embarrassed of it. But there's forgiveness. I was confronted by a mom with a son with a disability who kind of talked me through it. I was able to apologize, correct, but keep going. Because a lot of times at that point, you're like, you know what, I'm done. Because it was hard. It's embarrassing. I didn't do it right. But this idea of you won't get it right, but just keep going humbly, hands open with your experts close by. And then another one is put your money where your mouth is. This is a really interesting one. If you have the ability, if you're connected to your church, you might need to hire somebody. You might need to hire somebody who is going to focus on this and put effort and energy into it. You need to get this on your docket for your board meetings to say, what are we doing about this? Do we need fidget toys? Do we need a budget line so that we are pushing into this? Do we need to put money towards it? The push I always have in this is we don't need to save God money. All the money is God's money. And I can't tell you how many times in Young Life even, and in stories, we had our own elevator issue. We were building a new building at our camp, and the building was going to cost millions, $4 or $5 million. And the elevator was about 200 grand. And so they took it off the list because they're like, well, 4 million is a lot to raise, but 4.2 million is too much for God. So they took it off the list, and I had to go, and I met with the guy. It's a very funny story how it, like, I'd prayed, I was at camp. The guy doesn't live at camp. And I was like, Lord, I need to talk. If this guy, if I bump into him at any point, you know, in the next 6 months, I'll talk to him about it. Well, that night at dinner, who shows up? But the guy who's, it was just as funny, like, okay, Lord, here we go. So I just walked over and said, hey, like, I'd love to talk to you about why you took the elevator off. And he, honestly, it was like, it's a lot of money to raise. We're trying to save God money. And it's just like, all the money is God's. And spend God's money on this. It is such a worthy investment. It is such a worthy investment to spend the money in this space. And I went to Johnny Erickson Tata, which I'm sure a lot of you know. She hosted a global disability conference in 2018, I think 2019, something like that, in California that I went to. And we were sitting there, and it was it's the most beautiful thing I've ever been a part of. I can't even put into words, but she opened it and she said, God blesses disability ministry. And I was with my friend and my other staff, and we laughed out loud because we were like, yes, like God blesses disability, and not with like everything you'd ever hope and imagine, not that at all. But I am a testimony to where I've seen God care for his, like this group, this population is so precious to him, and he has money for them. And it's amazing the amount of money that comes up, that shows up, that allows. So if I can be an encouragement to you, this is a worthy investment of your money. Now, so some of these work for people who are decision makers. Sometimes they don't work if you're not, but this one is something that everyone can do. And kind of my last little point here is to read books in community. So the caution again, sometimes you want to just read, like, I just got to study and learn about it. I think it's called like the yoga mat syndrome or something, where you buy the yoga mat and then you buy the water bottle and then you buy the clothes and then you book the classes and you just keep getting ready to exercise, but you don't ever actually exercise. You just keep setting yourself up and, well, now I've got it. I know where I'm going and I know all the things. And at some point it's like, just exercise, like stop buying the stuff. So I encourage you to read books and read books, but in community, in gather. Like if you are just a layperson in your church thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do, start a book club. Say, we're just going to gather and read this book together and talk about it and just see what kind of bubbling up happens kind of in the in amongst yourselves. And Jessica was saying when we were chatting kind of before of how sometimes when you approach a church and say, I think we need to do something about disability, they're like, get in line, get in line. But sometimes if you say, hey, I think we need to do something about disability and I'd love to start a book club where we read this book together, they might be like, great, put it in the bulletin. Let's put it, like, let's do it. Like if you come with the suggestion, and this is such an easy, gentle entry in. So here are 3 books for me that are my favorites that I've read. The first is My Body Is Not a Prayer Request by Amy Kenny. I don't know if you've read it. It's scathing. Like at times you're like, whew, she's not wrong. Like it's pretty powerful of just her lived experience as someone with a disability and people trying to pray it out of her and her saying, I believe this is part of the gifts that God has given me, and you're trying to pray it away. It's a really powerful book. Adam by Henry Nouwen. This is a unique one. If people read Henry Nouwen, a lot of them have not heard of this one. And I don't know if you know the story, but he was kind of at the end of his ministry, feeling burnt out, thinking, I'm done. Like, I don't know, God, if you have anything left for me, do I even want to do this anymore? And God led him to a L'Arche community, and he became friends with this man named Adam. And Adam was Jesus to him. Adam is nonverbal. He's diapered in a wheelchair, like not who you would think could minister. And he completely changed, Henry Nouwen's life. And this is just the story of how he encountered Christ through this man at L'Arche. And then The Disabled God. So Nancy Island is someone who also lives with a disability, and just talks about her picture of where the church is missing it in theology, and saying she actually believes God is a disabled God, in that when Jesus resurrected, he still had his scars. He didn't come back in this perfected figure, but actually came back with these scars and marks on him. And then kind of goes through the Eucharist. And I won't give it all away. It's quite a technical book. So if you enjoy those kind of books, it's quite theological, and it's a really, really powerful read. There's a woman who in Calgary, actually, she would go and speak on disability in the church, and had all sorts of things that she was kind of teaching, and she would run these classes. And I also was going to help and run classes, but I didn't charge anything because I work for Young Life, so I can't actually charge anything. Whereas this was her job, and I had so many churches that I was speaking to, and she would maybe have 1 or 2. And we finally realized it's because of the cost. Like it's an unfortunate bar. And I would love for church. I mean, even in Young Life, it's still very hard to get Capernaum on the list. Yeah. And to say, like, you show what you value with your time and your money, kind of thing, but also recognizing if we're waiting for money, or if we're waiting to say we can't do it without hiring, it doesn't happen. Whereas I spoke at 8 to 10 churches before she spoke at one, because her cost was a hindrance. So it's a funny tension you have to work within, for sure. What I'd love to give you now is just a minute or two to just, what is your turn the dial? What is your next thing? I think sometimes if you get these great ideas, you're like, this is awesome. Then you go away and you make lunch and whatever, and they're like, I was going to do something. So I'm going to get you to write out, if you can come up with 2 things. One might be make a phone call. One might be start a book club, order the book, whatever it is. It could be very practical, but just write out. It can be more than 2 as well. But what are some of your next steps? And then I'll give you one more task to do after that. So just take a minute to write out what are you going to do? What is your practical next step? Okay, and once you've done that, I'd love for you to put a date beside them. When are you going to do that by? So if you're like, I'm going to order a book, maybe you could say by end of today. If you think, I want to talk to our pastor about whatever, that might be mid-July. So, but what's the date? What are you going to do? Pick one of them or all of them, but what is your date that you're going to do? So now with your date, put it in your calendar. So if you have an iPhone or a day timer or a something, put it in the calendar. So I'm going to order that book. put it in your calendar so that you get a reminder tonight. It says, don't forget to go on Amazon or whatever it is, but put it in your calendar. So this is how you turn the dial. I hope that's okay. I hope in my friendship group, we call it love bossing. I need to love boss people into things. So this is me love bossing you to do it. So what are you going to do? When are you going to do it? And then put it in your calendar.